He built empires with ruthless precision. She lived paycheck to paycheck, one illness away from collapse. But when she whispered 6 words that would cost her everything, the walls of his golden prison began to crack. The Miami skyline burned amber in the late afternoon, its glass towers reflecting wealth so obscene it seemed immortal. But inside the Carter mansion in Coral Gables, beneath chandeliers that cost more than most homes, something darker than poverty was taking root. Before we begin, subscribe, because love stories like this deserve to be felt, not just told. Camila Reyes stood at the iron gates of the estate, staring at her reflection in the polished black metal. At 24, she had already learned that survival required silence. Her mother's cancer treatments had drained every savings account. Her younger brother Diego was 2 semesters away from dropping out of college. When the call came confirming her position as nanny to the Carter family, she had wept, not from joy but from the unbearable relief of 1 more month of rent secured. The mansion loomed before her like a cathedral of excess. Marble columns, palm trees lining a driveway longer than her entire street. The air itself smelled expensive, lilies and imported perfume, wealth rendered into scent. Mrs. Matthews, the house manager, greeted her with efficiency that bordered on coldness. "Follow me. Don't touch anything. Don't speak unless spoken to. Mrs. Carter has particular standards." Then she appeared. Victoria Carter descended the grand staircase like royalty gracing peasants with her presence. Silk robe embroidered with gold thread, diamonds at her wrists that caught light like trapped stars. Her beauty was the kind that belonged on magazine covers, flawless, calculated, weaponized. Her eyes raked over Camila with the warmth of a scalpel. "So," Victoria said, her voice honey-laced with arsenic, "this is the girl who will raise my children?" Camila lowered her gaze respectfully. "Yes, Mrs. Carter. Thank you for the opportunity." Victoria circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. "The last nanny didn't survive 2 weeks. Let's see if you're made of stronger material, or if you'll crumble like the rest." The words hung in the air like a curse. The children came next. Ethan, 8 years old, with eyes too serious for his age. The kind of loneliness that comes from having everything except presence. Sophia, 6, vibrant and desperate for affection, grabbed Camilla's hand immediately, as if sensing someone who might actually stay. Camila knelt to their level, her voice soft. "I won't leave unless you want me to." For the first time that day, Sophia smiled. That evening, while reading Where the Wild Things Are in voices that made Ethan almost laugh, the bedroom door opened. The air shifted, charged, electric, dangerous. Alexander Carter entered, tall, broad-shouldered, a tailored suit even at home, as if armor were required at all times. He carried authority like a scent, the kind of power that made lesser men step aside without being asked. But when his children ran to him, something in his granite expression melted, just for a moment. He kissed their foreheads with a tenderness that felt forbidden in a man like him. Then his eyes found Camilla's, dark, penetrating, unreadable. "You must be the new nanny," he said, his voice low, measured. "Camila Reyes, sir." A brief nod. "Take care of them." Not a request, a command. He turned and left, but the room still felt full of him. Over the following weeks, Camila became the heartbeat of the children's world. She taught Sophia to braid hair while singing songs in Spanish. She listened to Ethan's worries about school, about feeling invisible in a house full of servants. She made them laugh. She made them feel seen. Even Alexander began to notice. The house felt different, lighter. His children smiled more. The tension that usually strangled every corner of the mansion seemed to ease when she was near. But Victoria's hostility sharpened like a blade being honed. She scrutinized Camilla's every move, criticized the way she folded laundry, made cutting remarks in French during dinner parties, not knowing Camilla understood enough to catch every poisoned word. The atmosphere grew heavier, pressure building toward an inevitable explosion. Then came the night everything changed. Camilla was carrying laundry down the long marble corridor when she passed Alexander's private study. The door stood slightly ajar, golden light spilling into the hallway. Voices leaked through, low, conspiratorial, venomous. She froze. "We moved the funds through the offshore accounts," Victoria's voice silk over steel. "Alexander won't suspect a thing. By the time he realizes, half his assets will be untouchable." Camilla's heart stopped. The laundry basket trembled in her hands. A man's voice followed. "Mr. Donovan, Alexander's trusted lawyer. And once he signs the trust papers, you'll legally control everything. He'll have no power left." Victoria's laugh was low, lethal. "He's too blind, too trusting. And if anyone interferes," a pause heavy with threat, "I'll destroy them." Camilla backed away, her blood turning to ice. She hurried to her small room in the servants' quarters, shaking so violently she could barely close the door. If she spoke, who would believe her? She was nothing, a poor nanny, invisible, disposable. But if she stayed silent, the man she worked for would lose everything, his company, his children's future. She sat on her narrow bed, whispering to the empty room, "If I stay quiet, I'm a coward. If I speak, I could lose everything." She thought of Ethan and Sophia, innocents who deserved a father not destroyed by betrayal. The next evening, courage and terror warring in her chest, Camilla made her choice. Alexander worked late in his office, pen poised over a thick folder of documents. She entered with a tea tray, her hands trembling so badly the porcelain rattled. He didn't look up at first. She set the tray down, hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Carter, don't sign anything your wife gives you. Please, it's a trap." The pen stopped midair. Slowly, Alexander looked up. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, dangerous. Camilla swallowed, forcing the words past the fear choking her throat. "I overheard Mrs. Carter and Mr. Donovan. They're planning to take everything from you." The silence that followed was suffocating. The golden clock on the wall ticked, each second a hammer blow. Alexander rose to his feet, towering over her. His face was unreadable, stone, steel, fury barely contained. "Do you realize what you're accusing my wife of?" His voice could have cut glass. "This could ruin you." Tears brimmed in Camilla's eyes, but she didn't look away. "I know, but I'd rather lose my job than stay silent while you lose your life's work." Alexander's hand hovered over the contract. His empire, his family, his trust, all balanced on the fragile words of a poor nanny. "If you're wrong," he whispered, cold enough to freeze blood, "you'll regret this." Camilla's voice shook but remained steady. "And if I'm right, you'll thank me." For the first time in years, doubt flickered across Alexander Carter's face. The contract lay untouched. The silence between them heavier than any storm, and that was the moment everything changed. The morning after Camilla's warning felt like walking on glass. Every sound too sharp, every glance too loaded. Alexander Carter sat at the long dining table, coffee untouched, his eyes fixed on financial reports that now read like encrypted threats. The children ate quietly at one end, supervised by Camilla, who moved through her duties with careful precision, acutely aware of the storm she had unleashed. Victoria entered like a perfume commercial brought to life. Silk, diamonds, and a smile rehearsed to perfection. "Darling," she purred, placing a manicured hand on Alexander's shoulder. "Have you signed the trust documents Mr. Donovan prepared?" Alexander's jaw tightened. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time her beauty didn't blind him. It felt like a costume, a performance. "Not yet." 2 words, but they landed like stones. Victoria's smile flickered, just for a second. "Alexander, this is urgent. The market doesn't wait. Donovan said timing is everything." Camilla, pouring juice for Sophia, felt the tension wrap around her throat like a noose. Alexander's gaze shifted to her, sharp, questioning, almost accusing, as if daring her to repeat her warning in front of his wife. She lowered her eyes, but her silence screamed louder than words. After breakfast, Victoria cornered Camilla in the hallway outside the children's playroom. Her smile was pure venom. "I don't know what little fantasies you've been spinning," Victoria whispered, stepping close enough that Camilla could smell her expensive perfume. "But let me make one thing crystal clear. People like you are invisible in houses like this. Try to meddle again and I'll make sure you regret ever stepping through that door." Camilla kept her voice calm, though her hands trembled at her sides. "I only want to protect this family." Victoria's laugh was soft, deadly. "Protect? You're a babysitter, not a savior. Know your place." She turned and walked away, heels clicking like gunshots on marble. That afternoon, Alexander summoned Camilla to his study. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking manicured gardens that looked more like art installations than living things. His hands were buried in his pockets, his silhouette cut against golden light. "Tell me exactly what you heard," he demanded without turning around. Camilla recounted every word. The offshore accounts, the trust papers designed to strip him of authority, the cold calculation in Victoria's voice. She spoke with trembling honesty, never breaking eye contact once he turned to face her. Alexander's jaw clenched. "If this is some elaborate scheme, if this is some way of getting close to me—" "I know how it sounds," she interrupted, tears rising despite her effort to hold them back. "But I swear on everything I have left in this world, on my mother's life, on my brother's future. I'm telling the truth. I'd rather be fired and homeless than stay quiet and let you be destroyed." For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes searched her face, looking for cracks, for lies, for anything that would make this easier to dismiss. Finally, his voice came, cold enough to cut glass. "If you're lying, Camilla, I will destroy you. Do you understand?" She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I understand." He turned back to the window, dismissing her with silence. The following days felt like living inside a tightening fist. Victoria, sensing her husband's sudden hesitation to sign anything, turned her cruelty toward Camilla with surgical precision. She criticized her in front of the children. "Really, Camilla, must you dress so plainly?" And whispered to guests during afternoon teas that the new nanny was ambitious beyond her station. But it was the dinner party that shattered everything. The Carters hosted an extravagant evening for Miami's elite, business partners, socialites, politicians. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and designer gowns, men in tuxedos, women dripping in jewels that cost more than Camilla's entire neighborhood. Camilla was instructed to serve drinks and watch the children discreetly from the edges of the room. She tried to remain invisible, as always. But Victoria had other plans. With a champagne flute raised, Victoria clinked her glass to silence the crowd. Her smile was radiant, her eyes gleamed with malice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the marble expanse, "allow me to introduce our new nanny. She has been quite vocal lately, perhaps too vocal." Every eye in the room turned toward Camilla. She froze, her tray trembling in her hands. Victoria's tone dripped with mockery. "She seems to think she understands corporate law better than my husband's own legal team. Imagine that. A cleaning girl turned nanny daring to question contracts worth billions." Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite at first, then growing bolder. Camilla's face burned with shame, but she held her head high. She looked toward Alexander, silently pleading for him to speak, to defend her, to do something. But he remained seated at the head table, his expression hard, unreadable, silent. Victoria pressed on, her voice sharpening like a blade. "Tell me, dear, did you come here to take care of my children, or to seduce my husband with your wild stories?" The guests gasped, some whispered, others smirked, enjoying the spectacle. Camilla's chest tightened, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. When she spoke, her voice was steady, despite the storm raging inside her. "I came here to protect this family." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then Victoria burst into laughter, a sound like breaking glass. "Protect us from what? Nannies belong in the nursery, not the boardroom. Don't forget that." The humiliation was complete. Camilla excused herself with what remained of her dignity and walked out of the ballroom. Every step felt like walking through fire. Later that night, Alexander found her sitting by the stone fountain in the garden. Moonlight painted her face silver. Her eyes were red from tears she'd finally allowed herself to shed in the darkness. He stood in the shadows, watching her. Something twisted inside him. Guilt, anger, admiration. This woman, powerless and poor, had stood before his entire world and refused to break. He stepped closer. "Why do you risk so much? You could have stayed silent, kept your job, kept your safety." Camilla looked up at him, moonlight catching in her dark eyes. "Because I couldn't watch you walk into a trap. Because your children deserve a father who isn't destroyed by betrayal." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. And because what?" he pressed, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Because sometimes the truth matters more than my own life." For the first time in years, Alexander felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust her, but the shadow of Victoria's power and the weight of appearances still chained him. As he turned to leave, Camilla's eyes filled with quiet pain. She knew she had awakened something dangerous, not just suspicion in Alexander's mind, but a forbidden spark between them that neither could control. A spark that could either save them both or burn everything to ash. But love had other plans. The days following the dinner party humiliation were heavy with silence. Camilla carried on with her duties, bathing the children, reading bedtime stories, preparing their meals. But something had shifted. The servants whispered when she passed. The security guards watched her with suspicion. Victoria had planted seeds of doubt throughout the household, and they had taken root quickly, yet the children clung to her even tighter. Sophia refused to sleep unless Camilla sang her a lullaby in Spanish. Ethan, who rarely spoke about his feelings, began confiding his fears to her, about his parents' arguments, about feeling like a stranger in his own home. "Why do people lie?" Ethan asked one evening, his voice small. Camilla brushed his hair back gently. "Sometimes because they're afraid. Sometimes because they want something that doesn't belong to them." "Will you lie to me?" "Never." He believed her. Children always knew. Alexander noticed the change in his children. They smiled more around Camilla than they ever had around Victoria. They ran to her first when they were hurt. They asked for her when she wasn't near. It gnawed at him, not with jealousy, but with something deeper. A recognition that what his children needed wasn't wealth or status. It was presence, authenticity, love without conditions, things he had forgotten how to give. One Saturday morning, Sophia fell ill. Nothing serious, a fever, a sore throat, but she cried for Camilla in the middle of the night, and Alexander found himself standing outside the nanny's small room in the servants' quarters, hesitating before knocking. Camilla opened the door, hair loose, dressed in simple cotton pajamas. For a moment, Alexander forgot why he'd come. She looked so different from the polished women in his world, raw, real, unguarded. "Sophia's asking for you," he said quietly. She grabbed a cardigan and followed him immediately. No hesitation. In Sophia's room, Camilla sat on the edge of the bed, pressed a cool cloth to the child's forehead, and hummed a melody Alexander didn't recognize. Within minutes, Sophia's breathing steadied. She fell asleep holding Camilla's hand. Alexander stood in the doorway watching. "Where did you learn that song?" Camilla didn't look up. "My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was sick. She said music heals what medicine can't touch." "Your grandmother? Is she still—" "She passed when I was 12. Camilla's voice was soft, tinged with old grief. "But I still hear her voice sometimes, in the quiet." Alexander stepped into the room, his voice barely above a whisper. "What was her name?" "Esperanza. It means hope." He nodded slowly, something in his chest tightening. "You carry her well." Camilla finally looked up at him, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. For a moment, they simply existed in the quiet space, two people from different worlds bound together by a sick child and 1,000 unspoken truths. The following week, something unprecedented happened. Alexander's car broke down on the way to a meeting. His driver was off that day, and Victoria had taken the other vehicle. In frustration, he called the house and asked whoever was available to pick him up. Camilla arrived in her old battered Honda Civic, a car held together by hope and duct tape. When Alexander saw it, he almost laughed. Almost. "This is what you drive?" She shrugged, embarrassed. "It gets me where I need to go, usually." He climbed into the passenger seat, his expensive suit incongruous against the worn fabric. The car smelled like vanilla air freshener and old coffee. A rosary hung from the rearview mirror. They drove in silence through Miami streets, past gleaming high-rises, then gradually into neighborhoods where paint peeled from buildings and laundry hung from fire escapes. "Where are we going?" Alexander asked. "You said you needed a ride. I'm taking you home, but I need to stop somewhere first." Her voice was apologetic. "It'll only take a minute." She pulled up in front of a small, modest house in Little Havana. The neighborhood was a world away from Coral Gables, vibrant, loud, alive in a way his sterile mansion could never be. Music spilled from open windows. Children played soccer in the street. The smell of fried plantains and Café Cubano filled the air. "Wait here," Camilla said, but Alexander followed her anyway. Inside, the house was tiny but immaculate. Worn furniture, but everything carefully maintained. Family photos covered the walls. Camilla as a child, smiling, a young man in a graduation cap, an older woman with kind eyes. From a back room, a frail voice called out, "Mija, is that you?" Camilla's entire demeanor changed, softened, opened. "See, Mama, I brought your medicine." Alexander watched from the doorway as Camilla knelt beside her mother's bed. The woman was thin, her face marked by illness, but her smile when she saw her daughter was radiant. "You work too hard, mi amor," the mother whispered in Spanish. "No such thing when it comes to you," Camilla replied, helping her mother take her medication, adjusting her pillows with infinite gentleness. Then, the mother's eyes found Alexander. She switched to accented English. "And who is this handsome man you bring to our home?" Camilla flushed. "Mama, this is Mr. Carter, my employer. I'm just giving him a ride." The older woman studied Alexander with the kind of penetrating gaze that only mothers possess. "Employer, I see." A pause. "You are lucky to have my daughter working for you. She has a good heart. Too good sometimes." Alexander found himself nodding. "I'm beginning to understand that, Senora." After leaving the house, Alexander was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Your mother, how long has she been sick?" 3 years. Breast cancer. It's in remission now, but the treatments..." Camilla's voice trailed off. "That's why I needed this job, why I can't afford to lose it." Alexander's hands clenched in his lap. "And your brother? The photos on the wall? Diego, he's in college, engineering. He wants to build bridges." Her smile was proud but pained. "But tuition is... we're managing." "Barely." "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" She glanced at him confused. "Why would I? You hired me to take care of your children, not to burden you with my problems." Alexander stared out the window, watching the city blur past. This woman, this poor invisible nanny, was holding together an entire family on wages that wouldn't cover one of Victoria's shopping trips, and she had risked it all to warn him about betrayal. The contrast was staggering, humbling. That evening, Alexander did something he hadn't done in years. He joined his children for dinner in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room. Camilla was making arroz con pollo, rice with chicken, a simple dish that filled the space with warmth. "Can I help?" Alexander asked. Both Camilla and the children stared at him in shock. "You want to help cook?" Camilla ventured carefully. "Is that so strange? You've never been in this kitchen in the 5 years I've worked here," Mrs. Matthews muttered from the corner. Alexander ignored her, rolling up his sleeves. "Then it's time I learned." Camilla handed him a wooden spoon, trying not to smile. "Stir, don't let it burn." He stirred awkwardly, clearly out of his element, and Sophia giggled. "Daddy, you're doing it wrong." "Then show me how it's done." She climbed onto a stool beside him, her small hands guiding his larger ones. Ethan joined them, explaining the proper technique with the seriousness of a seasoned chef. Camilla watched from across the counter, her heart doing something dangerous in her chest. This was the man beneath the armor, the father beneath the CEO, the human beneath the billions. And God help her, she was falling for him. Later, after the children were asleep, Alexander found Camilla on the back patio, looking up at the Miami sky. "They never see stars here," she said quietly. "Too much light pollution." He stood beside her. "Where did you see stars?" "My grandmother's village in Colombia, when I was little, before we came here. The sky looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet." Her voice was wistful. "I want to take Diego and my mother back someday. Let them see what I remember." Alexander studied her profile, the curve of her jaw, the sadness in her eyes, the strength that radiated from her even in stillness. "You will," he said with quiet certainty. "You'll take them back." She looked at him, surprised. "How can you be so sure?" "Because people like you don't give up. You bend, you break, but you don't quit." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I'm not as strong as you think. You're stronger than you know." The space between them felt charged, dangerous. He wanted to reach for her, wanted to close the distance, wanted to tell her that in 3 short weeks she had made him feel more alive than a decade with Victoria ever had. But he was still married, still trapped, still a coward. So instead, he simply stood beside her in the darkness, 2 people from different worlds, connected by something neither could name. And in that silence, something unbreakable began to form. The shift came quietly at first, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. Alexander began investigating on his own, staying late in his office, reviewing contracts with a scrutiny he should have employed years ago. He cross-referenced signatures, traced account numbers, followed paper trails that twisted through offshore banks and shell corporations with names that meant nothing. And with each discovery, the foundation of his marriage cracked a little more. Camilla had been right about everything, but acknowledging that truth meant confronting an empire built on lies. It meant admitting he had been blind, manipulated, made a fool of by the woman who slept beside him every night. Pride and truth warred inside him, and pride was losing. Victoria sensed the change like a predator smells blood. Her husband's coldness, his locked office door, his refusal to sign anything she placed before him. She pressed harder, her demands growing sharper, her smile tightening like a wire ready to snap. "You're acting paranoid, Alexander," she said one evening, her voice silk over steel. "Is this about that nanny? Are you really going to let some desperate girl poison your mind against your own wife?" Alexander didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, darling. Very careful." Then came the afternoon everything collapsed. Camilla was dusting the shelves in Alexander's study, a task she usually avoided, knowing it was his private sanctuary. But Mrs. Matthews had insisted, practically pushing her through the door. The study was immaculate as always, leather-bound books lining the walls, the scent of expensive cigars lingering in the air. But on the mahogany desk, carelessly left open, was a folder marked Sterling Holdings. Camilla's heart stuttered. She shouldn't look. She knew better. But the name echoed Victoria's words from that night in the hallway, the offshore accounts, the hidden transfers. Her hands trembling, she lifted the pages. What she found made her blood run cold. Detailed transaction records, millions flowing into accounts linked not to Carter Global Enterprises, but to private entities. Victoria's maiden name, Donovan's Trust, shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were staggering, enough to cripple Alexander's empire while building another in Victoria's shadow. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was proof written in ink and numbers. Camilla pulled out her old phone with shaking hands and began taking photos, each page every damning detail. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Every second felt like an hour. If anyone walked in, "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Camilla spun around, the phone nearly slipping from her grip. Victoria stood in the doorway, her expression serene, but her eyes burning with fury. "Mrs. Carter, I was just cleaning with your phone out, photographing my husband's private documents." Victoria stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice your little investigation? Did you think I didn't have cameras watching every corner of this house?" Camilla's throat constricted. "I found proof of what you're doing to him. I was going to..." "Going to what? Show him. Play the hero." Victoria's laugh was cold, sharp. "Oh, you poor stupid girl, you have no idea what you've just done." That evening, the Carters hosted another party. The timing was deliberate, calculated. Miami's elite filled the mansion once again. Politicians, CEOs, socialites draped in designer labels and manufactured charm. The orchestra played softly. Champagne flowed. Appearances were everything. Camilla tried to stay invisible, serving drinks, watching the children from the edges of the gilded ballroom. But anxiety crawled beneath her skin like insects. Victoria had been too calm after discovering her with the phone, too controlled. Something terrible was coming. Then the music softened, and Victoria clinked her champagne flute, calling for attention. Her smile was radiant, her voice carrying effortlessly across the marble expanse. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must address something deeply painful tonight. A betrayal within our own home," the crowd murmured, leaning forward with the hungry curiosity of those who thrive on scandal. Victoria's gaze locked onto Camilla like a sniper finding her target. "Our trusted nanny, Miss Reyes, has been caught stealing confidential business documents. Photographs of Alexander's private contracts were found on her phone." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Camilla felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "That's not true. Security footage confirms it," Victoria continued smoothly, her voice dripping false regret. "We believe she intended to sell company secrets to our competitors. Industrial espionage, hiding behind the innocent face of a caregiver." "No," Camilla's voice rang out, trembling but fierce. She stepped forward, her phone clutched in her hand. "I took those photos because I discovered fraud. Money being stolen from Mr. Carter himself. I was trying to protect him." Laughter scattered through the crowd, nervous, uncomfortable, disbelieving. To these people, the word of a poor nanny against a billionaire's wife was laughable, a fiction, a desperate defense. Victoria's smile widened, triumphant. "You see, the lies grow more elaborate. Alexander, darling, please, show them the evidence." And then Alexander himself stepped forward. Camilla's eyes found his, pleading, desperate. Surely he would remember her warnings. Surely he would look at the photos, investigate before condemning her. But in his hand were printed images, security footage of Camilla in his study, holding documents. To anyone who didn't know the context, the picture was damning, clear, irrefutable. The room waited for his judgment. Alexander's face was pale, his jaw tight. His eyes met Camilla's, and for a moment she saw doubt flicker there, confusion, pain. But then his voice came, low and cold, weighted by the pressure of hundreds of watching eyes. "I'm sorry, Camilla, but the evidence is clear." The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her vision blurring with tears. "You know me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You know I would never hurt you." Look at the documents yourself, please." But Alexander didn't move, didn't speak. He stood frozen, a prisoner of his own pride and the expectations of his world. Victoria gestured to the security guards. "Remove her from the premises, immediately." Strong hands gripped Camilla's arms. She didn't resist, didn't scream. She straightened her back, lifting her chin even as tears streamed down her face. As they dragged her toward the doors, she stopped, turning to look at Alexander one last time. "When you discover the truth," she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "remember this moment. Remember that I tried to save you, and you chose not to believe me." The crowd murmured. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged knowing glances. Alexander's hands clenched at his sides, his face a mask of stone. But his eyes betrayed everything. Outside, the humid Miami night clung to her skin like shame. The guards handed her a cardboard box with her few belongings. A spare uniform, a book she'd been reading to the children, a photo of her mother and brother. She clutched it to her chest and walked down the long driveway alone, her footsteps echoing on the polished stone. Behind her, music and laughter resumed, the party continuing as if nothing had happened, as if she had never mattered at all. When she reached the iron gates, she paused, looking back at the mansion one last time. Light spilled from every window, warm and golden and false. Somewhere inside, Ethan and Sophia were probably crying for her, wondering why she'd left without saying goodbye. The thought broke something inside her chest. She turned away and kept walking, disappearing into the darkness beyond the gates. Inside the ballroom, Alexander remained standing long after the party resumed. Victoria leaned close, her breath warm against his ear, her voice a venomous whisper of triumph. "IOC, darling. Problem solved." But Alexander's chest felt hollow, empty. Camilla's words echoed in his mind. "When you discover the truth, remember this moment." He looked down at the security photos in his hand, the evidence that had condemned her. But now, removed from the pressure of watching eyes, something about them felt wrong, staged. Why would a woman trying to steal documents photograph them in his study, where cameras could catch her? Why not hide, sneak, cover her tracks? Unless she wasn't stealing at all, unless she was gathering proof. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had just destroyed an innocent woman to preserve his pride. That night, Alexander didn't sleep. He sat alone in his study until dawn, the city lights of Miami blurring through his vision. Camilla's face haunted him, the tears in her eyes, the dignity she'd maintained even as his world tore her apart. He opened the Sterling Holdings folder with shaking hands, this time reading every word with the attention it deserved, every clause, every transfer, every forged signature. And there it was, all of it. Exactly as she'd said. The offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the systematic dismantling of his empire, piece by piece, transferred into Victoria's control. His wife had been destroying him for months, maybe years, and the only person brave enough to warn him had been a poor nanny who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. He had repaid her courage with humiliation, with exile, with betrayal. Alexander dropped his head into his hands, shame crushing him like a physical weight. Across the city, in her tiny apartment in Little Havana, Camilla sat on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing. Her mother was asleep in the next room. Diego had stayed late at the library studying, unaware of the disaster that had unfolded. She should have felt angry, should have cursed Alexander's name, Victoria's cruelty, the injustice of a world where wealth always won, but all she felt was hollow. She had tried to do the right thing, and it had cost her everything. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry you got caught up in our family's mess. Here's a month's severance. Don't contact us again." Below the message was a bank transfer, $5,000. Camila stared at the screen, something bitter rising in her throat. They thought they could pay her off, buy her silence with money that meant nothing to them and everything to her. She deleted the message without responding. Some things couldn't be bought. Some wounds couldn't be healed with cash. Outside her window, the sun began to rise over Miami, indifferent and eternal. And in that dawn, two people sat alone in their separate worlds, one drowning in regret, the other drowning in betrayal, both broken by the same lie. 3 weeks passed like a prison sentence. Alexander Carter moved through his days like a ghost inhabiting his own life. Board meetings blurred into conference calls. Contracts piled up unsigned on his desk. At night, he stood at his bedroom window, staring at the city lights, unable to sleep. Victoria grew impatient with his distance. "You're being ridiculous," she hissed one evening. "She was just a nanny, let it go." But he couldn't let it go. The children were worse. Sophia cried herself to sleep every night, clutching the stuffed rabbit Camilla had given her. Ethan stopped talking almost entirely, his eyes carrying an accusation his young voice couldn't articulate. "Where's Camilla?" Sophia asked every morning. "She had to leave," Alexander would reply, the words like glass in his throat. "But she promised she wouldn't leave us," Sophia whispered, tears streaming down her small face. "She promised." Each word was a knife. Alexander finally did what he should have done weeks ago. Late one night, he called his private investigator, not Donovan, not anyone connected to Victoria, and ordered a complete audit of every account, every transfer, every signature on every document related to Sterling Holdings. The results came back 48 hours later. The investigator's face was grim when he handed over the folder. "Mr. Carter, if even half of this is accurate, you've been systematically defrauded for the past 18 months. We're talking about $70 million, maybe more." Alexander's hands trembled as he opened the file. There it was, all of it. Camilla had been right about everything. Forged signatures, shell corporations, money flowing into accounts controlled by Victoria and Donovan. A web of deception so intricate it would have been invisible to anyone not looking for it. Anyone except a poor nanny who had risked everything to warn him. "There's more," the investigator said quietly. "The security footage from the night she was accused? It was edited. Timestamps don't match. Someone altered it to make it look like she was stealing when she was actually documenting evidence." Alexander closed his eyes, shame washing over him in waves. He had destroyed an innocent woman. Cast her out. Let her be humiliated in front of hundreds of people, all to protect his pride and his reputation. All while the real thief smiled beside him. That same night, Alexander drove to Little Havana. He parked his luxury sedan on a street where it looked absurdly out of place, drawing stares from neighbors sitting on their porches. He walked to Camilla's building, his expensive shoes clicking on cracked pavement. The address the investigator had provided led to a narrow stairwell that smelled of cooking spices and old paint. He climbed to the 3rd floor, his heart hammering. He knocked. Silence. He knocked again. The door opened a crack, and Camilla's younger brother Diego appeared, his eyes widening in recognition. You've got some nerve showing up here. I need to speak with Camilla, please. She doesn't want to see you. You ruined her life. I know, and I need to make it right. Diego's jaw tightened, but something in Alexander's expression, raw, broken, genuine, made him pause. He turned and called into the apartment. Mila, someone's here for you. Footsteps. Then Camilla appeared in the doorway. She looked different, thinner. Her eyes carried shadows that hadn't been there before, but her back was straight, her chin lifted. When she saw Alexander, her expression didn't change. No anger, no surprise, just weary resignation. What do you want? Her voice was flat. To apologize, to tell you that you were right, about everything. He pulled out the investigator's folder, holding it out to her. I have proof now. Victoria and Donovan have been stealing from me for over a year. The security footage was edited. You were telling the truth and His voice broke. I destroyed you for it. Camilla didn't take the folder. You're 3 weeks too late. I know. Do you? Her voice rose, emotion finally cracking through. Do you know what it's like to be called a thief in front of hundreds of people? To have your name dragged through the mud? I can't find work anywhere. Nobody will hire me. Your wife made sure of that. I'll fix it. I'll tell everyone the truth. You can't fix this. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You chose to believe her over me. You stood there and let them drag me out like garbage. You knew me, Alexander. You knew who I was, and you still chose appearances over truth. Each word landed like a blow, because she was right. I was a coward, he whispered. I was terrified of what the truth would cost me, my marriage, my reputation, my pride. He stepped closer. But losing you cost me more. Camilla's breath caught. Don't. I can't stop thinking about you, about your courage, about the way my children loved you, about who I became when you were near. His voice was raw, stripped of every defense. You made me want to be better, and I failed you. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Camilla spoke, her voice barely audible. What do you want from me, Alexander? Help me take them down. Victoria and Donovan. They won't stop with me. They'll destroy the company, hurt more people, but I can't do it alone. He paused. I need you. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face. This isn't about us. This is about your children. They deserve a father who fights for what's right. Then you'll help? Camilla closed her eyes, tears streaming silently. Every instinct screamed to slam the door in his face, but she thought of Sophia's tears, Ethan's silence, children caught in the crossfire of adult lies. I'll help you, she whispered, but not for you, for them. A flicker of relief crossed Alexander's face. That's all I ask. The next evening, Camilla entered the Carter mansion through the service entrance. Mrs. Matthews gasped when she saw her. Miss Reyes, what are you? She's with me, Alexander said, appearing in the hallway. His voice carried an authority that silenced all questions. They worked through the night in his study, door locked, papers spread across every surface. Camilla showed him the photos she'd taken. Alexander matched them with the investigators' findings. Together they built an irrefutable case. Transaction records, forged documents, email trails, offshore account statements. Hours bled into each other. At some point, Alexander ordered coffee. They sat across from each other, exhausted but focused. Why did you take the photos? He asked quietly. You knew the risk. Because it was right, she said simply. Because your children deserved better. Because she paused. Because I couldn't watch you be destroyed. His hand moved across the desk, covering hers. I don't deserve your help. Or your forgiveness. She didn't pull away. No, you don't. But she didn't move her hand either. In the silence, something fragile began to heal. Not trust, not yet, but possibility. Dawn broke over Miami, painting the sky gold and pink. Alexander stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours hunched over documents. He walked to the window and Camilla joined him. Tomorrow I present this to the board, he said. It ends tomorrow. Will they believe you? They'll have to. The evidence is overwhelming. He turned to face her. But I need you there, as a witness, to testify to what you heard. Fear flickered in her eyes. She'll destroy me again. Not this time. This time I'll stand beside you. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. His voice was fierce. I won't fail you again. Camilla searched his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the weakness that had broken her before. But all she saw was a man finally willing to fight. Okay, she whispered. I'll be there. And in that moment, something shifted between them, fragile as dawn, but just as inevitable. The morning of the board meeting arrived with the weight of destiny. The Carter Global Enterprises Tower loomed over Miami, its glass walls reflecting the rising sun like a fortress preparing for war. Inside, tension crackled through every corridor. Alexander dressed in his sharpest suit, armor for the battle ahead, but his hands trembled as he fastened his cufflinks. Not from fear of losing his company, but from the knowledge that today he would finally become the man he should have been all along. Camilla arrived separately, dressed in a simple navy dress, the same one she'd worn to her first interview. She stood outside the tower, staring up at the gleaming structure that had once represented her salvation and had become her destruction. Her phone buzzed, a text from Alexander. You don't have to do this. I can fight alone. She typed back, No, you can't. And you shouldn't have to. Inside the boardroom, the stage was set. Victoria arrived first, radiant in a cream designer suit, diamonds glittering at her throat. Donovan followed, carrying his briefcase of lies with practiced confidence. The board members filed in. 12 men and women who controlled billions, their expressions neutral, professional, curious about the urgent matter Alexander had called them to address. When Alexander entered with Camilla beside him, the room went silent. Victoria's smile froze, her eyes locked onto Camilla with pure venom. Alexander, darling, Victoria's voice was silk over razors. Surely you're not bringing that disgraced thief into a board meeting. Alexander's voice cut through the room like steel. Sit down, Victoria. Everyone, please take your seats. What I'm about to show you will change everything you think you know about this company. He began methodically, clinically. Screen by screen, document by document, Alexander dismantled the lie his marriage had become. Transaction records appeared on the monitors, millions flowing from Carter Global into offshore accounts. Shell corporations bearing Victoria's maiden name, forged signatures that didn't match his handwriting under forensic analysis. The board members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock to horror. For 18 months, Alexander said, his voice steady despite the fury beneath it. My wife and my lawyer have been systematically stealing from this company. $73 million diverted. Trust documents designed to strip me of control while giving Victoria legal authority over every asset. Donovan shot to his feet. This is outrageous. These documents are fabricated. Sit down. Alexander's voice was thunder. "The forensic accountants have verified every transaction. The FBI has been notified. You're finished." Victoria's mask finally cracked. She stood slowly, her beauty now a weapon losing its edge. "You would believe her?" She pointed at Camilla with trembling fury. "A nobody, a servant, over your own wife." Alexander stepped beside Camilla, his presence a shield. "I would believe the woman who risked everything to warn me. The woman who saw the truth when I was too proud and blind to see it myself." Camilla's voice rang out, clear and strong. "I overheard Mrs. Carter and Mr. Donovan planning this theft weeks ago. I warned Mr. Carter. I took photographs of the fraudulent documents to prove what I'd heard." She lifted her chin. "You humiliated me, called me a thief, destroyed my reputation. But the only criminals in this room are standing behind that table." The chairman of the board spoke, his voice grave. "Mrs. Carter, these allegations are severe. Until a full investigation is complete, you are barred from all company accounts and authority. Mr. Donovan, the same applies to you. Security will escort you both out." Victoria's composure shattered completely. She lunged toward Alexander, her voice breaking with rage and desperation. "You'll regret this. She's manipulated you. She's using you." Alexander's eyes held no love, no anger, only pity. "The only mistake I made was trusting you for so long. Goodbye, Victoria." Security guards stepped forward. As they led Victoria and Donovan away, her screams echoed through the glass corridors. Desperate, venomous, defeated. The boardroom fell silent. The chairman turned to Alexander. "You've saved this company, and we owe Miss Reyes an apology and our gratitude." Camilla's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of vindication so overwhelming it hurt. When the meeting ended, Alexander and Camilla stood alone in the empty boardroom. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like stars. The weight of months of lies had finally lifted. "It's over," Camilla whispered. "No," Alexander said quietly. "It's just beginning." He turned to face her fully. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without obligations, without pressure, without anything but honesty." Her heart raced. "Alexander, you changed me." His voice was raw, stripped of every defense. "Not just because you saved my company, but because you showed me what courage looks like, what integrity looks like. You risked everything when you had nothing to gain. You stood in front of my entire world and refused to break." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't do it for gratitude. I know. You did it because it was right. Because you have a moral compass I'd forgotten existed." He stepped closer. "I spent years building an empire, but I forgot how to be human. You reminded me." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between your warning and this moment, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air, vulnerable and true. "Not because you're convenient, not because I'm grateful, but because when I'm near you, I remember who I wanted to be before wealth made me forget." Camilla's breath caught. "You're still married?" "Legally, yes. But Victoria and I are finished. Divorce papers will be filed today. It'll take time to untangle everything, but it's over." He reached for her hand, hesitant, asking permission. "I'm not asking you to wait for me. I'm not asking you to forgive me for failing you. I'm just asking if, someday, when I've proven I'm worthy of your trust." She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. You want to know what I see when I look at you? He nodded, unable to speak. I see a man who made mistakes, but I also see a man who's fighting to fix them. A father who loves his children, someone capable of change. Her voice broke. And yes, I see someone I could love, maybe already do. Alexander's eyes closed, relief and longing washing over his face. But, she continued firmly, love isn't enough. Not yet. You need to rebuild yourself first. Find out who Alexander Carter is without the armor of wealth. Prove to yourself, not to me, that you can be the man you want to be. How do I do that? She smiled through tears. Start by being present. With your children, with yourself. Let go of the image and embrace the truth. He nodded slowly. Will you help me? I'll be here, as a friend, as someone who believes in who you can become. She squeezed his hand, but not as yours. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Alexander transformed. He sold the mansion, too full of Victoria's poison, and moved with his children into a smaller home near the water. He began therapy, started cooking dinner with Ethan and Sophia every night. Attended their school events, learned their fears and dreams. Camilla watched from a careful distance. She returned to work, not as a nanny, but as a consultant, helping Alexander establish a foundation for families facing medical debt. She used her story to help others, turning pain into purpose. They saw each other often, coffee on Saturdays, dinners with the children, conversations that stretched late into the night, rebuilding trust one honest word at a time. Slowly, Alexander shed the armor, laughed more, slowed down, remembered what mattered, and Camilla saw him, truly saw him, not as a billionaire, but as a man finally learning to be human. 6 months after the board meeting on a quiet Sunday morning, Alexander knocked on Camilla's door. She opened it to find him holding a small box. What's this? A gift, not a transaction, not an apology, just something I want you to have. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small compass pendant. You were my compass, he said softly. When I was lost, you showed me true north. I wanted you to have something that reminds you of your own strength. Camilla's eyes filled with tears. Alexander, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know that every day I'm grateful you walked into my life, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. She stepped forward and kissed his cheek gently. Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be. And in that moment, love didn't conquer. It waited, patient and true, for the right time to bloom. 1 year later, the morning light poured through the windows of Alexander's beach house, softer, warmer than the cold marble halls of his former mansion. The sound of waves crashed gently against the shore, a rhythm that had become the heartbeat of his new life. In the kitchen, Sophia hummed while setting the table. Ethan carefully poured orange juice into glasses, his tongue sticking out in concentration. They had learned to do these small things themselves, tasks that once seemed beneath a billionaire's children, but now filled them with simple pride. Alexander stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the focused intensity he once reserved for billion-dollar deals. He wore jeans and a faded t-shirt, his feet bare against the cool tile. A knock at the door made all three of them turn. Sophia's eyes lit up. She's here. The little girl ran to the door and flung it open. Camilla stood on the threshold, holding a basket of fresh fruit from the farmer's market, her hair loose around her shoulders, her smile genuine and unguarded. "Buenos dias, mi amor," she said, kneeling to embrace Sophia. "You came early," Sophia exclaimed. "I promised we'd make breakfast together, didn't I?" Ethan approached shyly, and Camilla pulled him into the hug too. These children had been the bridge between two worlds, the reason she'd risked everything, and the reason she'd come back. Alexander watched from the kitchen doorway, a soft smile playing at his lips. "Coffee?" "Always." They cooked together in comfortable silence. Not the silence of strangers, but the quiet intimacy of people who had walked through fire and emerged scarred but whole. Camilla diced strawberries, while Alexander flipped pancakes. The children set napkins and utensils, chattering about their week. "Dad took us sailing," Ethan said proudly, "and he didn't even bring his phone." Camilla raised an eyebrow at Alexander. "No phone? Who are you, and what have you done with Alexander Carter?" He laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and warm. "Turns out the world doesn't end when you disconnect for a few hours." Revolutionary concept. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something passed between them. Understanding, affection, possibility. After breakfast, the children ran outside to play on the beach. Through the window, Alexander and Camilla watched them chase waves, their laughter carrying on the salt-tinged breeze. "They're happy," Camilla said softly, "because of you. You gave them something I couldn't. Presence, consistency, love without conditions." She turned to face him. "You give them that now too. You've changed, Alexander, because you showed me how." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've been waiting to say until the moment felt right." Camilla's heart quickened. "What is it?" "The divorce was finalized last week. Victoria's trial concluded. She'll serve 5 years for fraud. Donovan got 7. He paused. "My lawyers, the board, the media circus, it's all finally quiet." "That's good. You can move forward." "That's just it." He stepped closer. "I don't want to move forward without you. Not as an employee, not as a friend, but as—" He struggled for words. "As whatever you're willing to give me." Camilla's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, I know I don't deserve you. I know I failed you when it mattered most, but this past year you've watched me rebuild myself. You've seen me at my worst and somehow still believe in my best." His voice broke. "I love you, Camilla. Not the idea of you. Not gratitude disguised as love. But you, your courage, your integrity, the way you love my children, the way you challenge me to be better." She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath her palm. "I love you too. I've loved you since the night you stood beside me in that boardroom, since you chose truth over pride. Then be with me, not in secret, not in shadow, but fully, completely, without apology." She looked into his eyes, those dark eyes that had once been so cold and were now filled with warmth, vulnerability, and hope. "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her then, not with desperation or possession, but with reverence, as if she were something precious and fragile and worth protecting. The kiss tasted like salt air and coffee and second chances. When they pulled apart, both were crying. "I don't have much to offer," Camilla said, laughing through tears. "I'm still just a girl from Little Havana." "You're everything," Alexander replied. "You're the reason I remember what matters. Money builds walls, but you taught me that truth tears them down." Through the window, Sophia spotted them and squealed. "They're kissing, Ethan, look!" The children came running inside, crashing into them with hugs and laughter. The four of them stood in the sunlit kitchen, tangled together, no longer broken pieces, but something whole. 6 months later, they married. Not in a grand ballroom with hundreds of guests, but on the same beach where they'd rebuilt their lives. Camilla's mother sat in the front row, healthy and radiant, tears streaming down her face. Diego stood as Alexander's best man, his initial distrust transformed into respect. Sophia was the flower girl, taking her job with utmost seriousness. Ethan carried the rings, beaming with pride. The ceremony was simple, the vows honest. "I promise to choose truth over pride," Alexander said, his voice steady. "To be present, to love you not for what you've given me, but for who you are." Camilla's voice trembled, but never wavered. "I promise to see you, not the wealth, not the title, but the man. To remind you of your strength when you forget. To build a life where love matters more than appearances." When they kissed as husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause. The waves crashed against the shore, eternal and indifferent, but somehow it felt like even the ocean was celebrating. That evening, as the sun set over Miami, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Camilla and Alexander stood at the water's edge. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Alexander asked. "You walked into the children's room like you owned the world." "I thought I did," he smiled ruefully. "Turns out I didn't own anything that mattered." "And now?" He looked at her, his wife, his compass, his redemption. "Now I'm the richest man alive." She laughed, gesturing at the modest beach house behind them. "We live in a rental, Alexander. I'm not talking about money." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I have you. I have my children. I have a purpose beyond profit. That's wealth no bank can measure." Camilla's eyes shimmered with tears. "Who knew a billionaire could become a poet?" "You did. You saw it before I did." They stood in silence, watching the sun sink into the horizon, the sky ablaze with color. Sophia and Ethan played nearby, their laughter mingling with the sound of waves. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked quietly. "Walking into that mansion? Everything that happened?" Camilla considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain, the humiliation, the fear." She paused. "But I don't regret warning you. I don't regret fighting for truth. And I don't regret falling in love with a man brave enough to change. I wasn't brave, you were." "No," she corrected gently. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do what's right despite it. You were terrified of losing everything, but you still stood beside me in that boardroom. That's courage." Alexander closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him like absolution. As darkness fell and stars began to appear above Miami's lights, the family walked back to the house together. Inside, they gathered around the small kitchen table. No servants, no formality, just the four of them sharing a simple meal. They laughed, they talked, they existed in the kind of ordinary, beautiful moment that wealth could never buy. Later, after the children were asleep, Alexander and Camilla sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a shared blanket, listening to the ocean. "What do you think happens next?" Camilla asked. "More of this, building the foundation, helping families like yours who are drowning in medical debt, teaching Ethan and Sophia that wealth is a responsibility, not a right." He kissed her temple. "Growing old with you." She smiled against his shoulder. "That sounds perfect." "It's not glamorous." "I don't want glamorous. I want real." And it was real. Beautifully, messily, perfectly real. The moon rose over the water, silver light painting everything in shades of grace. In a mansion across the city, new deals were being made, new fortunes built and lost. But here, on this quiet beach, 4 people had found something more valuable than any empire. They had found each other, found truth, found love stripped of pretense and polished until it shone brighter than any diamond. Alexander Carter, who had once measured his worth in billions, now measured it in moments, bedtime stories, Sunday breakfasts, the weight of his wife's hand in his. And Camilla Reyes, the poor nanny who had dared to speak truth to power, had proven that sometimes the greatest wealth lies not in what you have but in who you become. The story began with a warning whispered in the dark. It ended with a family bathed in light. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe for more romances that remind us love can change everything. Because sometimes, the person who saves you isn't who you expected, but exactly who you needed.